Do you want views like these? Do you want the physique of a monkey? Well then, you need to learn how to climb trees. And by the end of this video, you'll be armed with the knowledge to become a master monkey. So the first thing we need to cover in this ground school is the basic techniques used when climbing. The easiest and most intuitive method is simply grabbing branches and climbing them like a ladder. While it may seem that this needs no explanation, in light of making the most beginner-friendly lesson, we're going to cover it anyway. Now the spacing, size, and thickness of all the branches will affect the difficulty of the climb. The most helpful tip, especially for beginners who may not have much strength, is to use both legs and arms to move upward, keeping their center of gravity close to the trunk and allowing your legs to bear the majority of the load. For those who are more confident in their grip, they may find it necessary to plant their feet on the trunk, leaning away from the tree in order to keep weight on the feet. This is often necessary for trees with branches more sparsely spaced. Your chances of falling during this part of the climb are very low, as long as you keep the necessary points of contact, which will be discussed in depth later. So the dreaded part of any climb is the part with no branches, and for good reason. You have nothing to grab onto to make your vertical ascent to the branches. Many people don't even consider climbing a tree if they cannot reach the branches from the ground. This mentality is fine when you're learning, but it severely restricts your options. The challenge of branch-only climbing will fade quickly. With that, we'll get into the best ways to climb up to the branches of a tree. The first method resembles that of a vertical crawl, requiring you to grip the trunk with your hands, rest weight on your feet, and move both in synchrony upwards to ascend the tree. Try to keep your feet close to your hands and keep tension on both to avoid slipping. Now this technique can be one of the fastest methods, but it comes with some drawbacks. The first problem is that it is by far the most dangerous method, as your only direct grip on the tree is with your hands, which are either gripping the bark or palming the wood. This puts you in a very precarious position if the bark breaks, and if your hands slip, because both will send you falling backwards to your demise. To get around these shortcomings, we can instead grip the tree with both our feet and our hands and push either our legs or our arms up both at the same time. This method does not require you to rely solely on the bark and instead gives you multiple points of contact to fall back upon. You can also modify this position if you get tired or are put in a bad situation by wrapping both legs and arms around the tree. It may not be comfortable, but it is nearly impossible to fall from, and if you're too fatigued to climb down, you can simply slide. Now, as for which method is best, it depends on who and when they are using it. Generally, the vertical crawl will require more strength and skill, but can be both faster and used on bigger trunks. As long as they have either sturdy bark or knots and bumps, they can be used as handholds. The other method is generally more beginner-friendly, and it's much safer in most cases. The only problem is that it requires a much thinner trunk to utilize. Now, even if you are too weak to pull off either of these techniques, there are still ways to reach branches that are not easily accessible. You can try running and jumping for branches that are slightly out of reach, using the tree as something to boost off of. Or you can try scaling another, easier tree nearby to get to the main tree that you were looking to climb. If there's anything to take away from this, what you lack in strength and skill can be made up for with creativity. Now, final technique that I like to throw in is the muscle up, and while it may not be very beginner friendly, it can still prove useful when you have a branch that is both reachable but not easy to get on top of. Even if you lack the strength to fully take advantage of the muscle up, beginners should still practice the negative because it is a great way to move from on top of a branch to a hang without introducing any unnecessary momentum. Now that you have a basic idea of how to climb a tree, it's a good time to talk about how to not fall out of a tree. One of the biggest killers for aspiring monkeys is branches breaking. Now, it is important to keep in mind that branches rarely break for no reason, but simply break when you introduce a load that is too high for the wood to support. Some people will tell you that the only way to avoid falling to your death is to exclusively climb trees that are far too big and strong to possibly break. This is a naive and overly conservative notion. You will be surprised with how strong branches can be if used correctly. It pretty much comes down to weight placement. Branches are exponentially stronger closer to the trunk compared to farther out due to a number of reasons, but the chief cause being levers. If we apply a load farther from the fulcrum, where the branch connects to the trunk, then we increase the relative load on the branch compared to if we were closer to the fulcrum. As you can clearly see here, this flimsy pine branch can support my full body weight when I hold it closest to the trunk, but when I shift my weight to the middle, the branch immediately snaps. Now, while you can stretch the weight capacity of branches by simply holding them close to the trunk, there are some branches that will not be able to hold the load at all. The weight capacity of any branch can vary wildly depending on wood type, but regardless of the type of tree or thickness of branch, rotten wood will prove very unforgiving. Not only does rotten wood have very poor strength, but it also tends to break much more dramatically compared to healthy wood. Often healthy branches won't just snap off, usually remaining attached to the trunk by a string of wood fibers. Living wood will also give warning signs before breaking, often bending, and maybe you'll even get some cracking noises in there. The only surefire way to not fall victim to a break is to carefully inspect branches before climbing on them. When first climbing an unfamiliar tree, don't immediately put your full body weight on a branch. Instead, test its durability by putting a small amount of load onto it and seeing how it responds. Once you're confident in structural stability, then you can climb on it. Also, when testing branches, make sure to have firm holds on known strong branches. This conveniently leads us to the second best way to ensure safety, and that is points of contact. Points of contact is simply the discipline of ensuring you have a minimum number of sound holds on the tree at all time. You may be familiar with the ladder climbing rule, that is, to keep at least 3 points of contact at all time, but this generally won't apply to trees. Your points of contact can be broken up into 2 different categories: hard and soft. Hard contact points exercise full positive connection to the tree regardless of the direction of load or friction. The most common example will be your hands grabbing onto a branch. While our hands will almost always be the only hard contacts, our legs can sometimes become hard contacts, such as when you wrap them around a trunk or branch. Soft contact points are any point of contact that relies on either friction or is only sound when supporting weight in a certain direction. This will most commonly be your feet standing on top of a branch, but may also include sitting on a branch or grabbing a surface that is too large to wrap your fingers around. Now, you generally should only rely on hard contact points, the number of which depends on the type of contact and stability of the branch that said contact is on. As long as the hold is sound enough to hold full body weight, it is enough. For example, a beginner may not possess the grip strength to hang on one arm, meaning that they should try and keep both hands planted as often as possible. But someone who is confident in their one-arm hang can safely rely on only one hand. Now, obviously, you cannot keep 2 hands on the tree at all times, and that is where soft contact points come in. The main purpose of soft contact points is to shift load away from active load-bearing holds in order to reduce fatigue and assist in transitioning the placement of hard holds. Another thing to think about when evaluating the soundness of your holds is momentum. While you may be able to statically hang on one hand, you may not be able to hold on during a sudden fall, such as one that would be caused by a branch breaking. This is because G-forces can temporarily increase the load on a hold. The most important thing to take away from holds is preparing for the unexpected, whether that be a foot slip or a branch breaking. Try and always put yourself in a position to not fall if something bad were to happen. Now, it's time to address the nerds in the room, muttering about safety equipment. Yes, if you want to effectively nullify your chance of injury using ropes, harnesses, helmets, and parachutes, then so be it. But know that you're banned from the Cool Kids Club. Climbing can often be rough on the hands, so it may be helpful to wear gloves in order to protect them and gain a better grip. But you should understand that the calluses that will allow you to not wear gloves will not be developed while you're wearing gloves, or it will only be developed minimally. So, use gloves sparingly only when you absolutely need them. Wearing thick protective clothing can be helpful in reducing scrapes and brush burns, but is up to personal preference. The only thing that I would truly recommend is to attempt to climb barefoot. While your feet will take a little bit of time to adapt to the extra stress, you will gain much better grip and control. Now, if you don't want to be barefoot in public for fear of Jay sneaking up on you, then you can wear thin-soled shoes, ideally climbing shoes. While we're on the topic of safety, it would be a good idea to understand what the risks of climbing actually are. And to know the risk, we need to know how tall the trees that we're climbing are. And that's where today's sponsor, math, comes in. Unless you have a really long ruler, you can't easily measure the height of a tree. And even if you have a tape measure, you wouldn't want to climb the tree without first knowing how horribly you'd die if you fell. The simple solution to this is trigonometry. As long as we know the angle of elevation from a point a known distance away from the base of a tree, we can calculate the height. Now, you may be wondering how we can find the angles of trees, and that's where we can use a high-tech tool known as a clinometer. With this bad boy, all you have to do is line up the precise sight-finding tube with the top of the tree, and then read the numbers that the string is touching. Now, in this example here, you can see that I opted to manually measure the distance from the tree using a tape measure, and while technically you can find that distance using the angle of depression and your height, the readings are often inaccurate due to the angle being very small and the distance exponentially increasing or decreasing the closer the angle is to either 0 or 90. In this example, I measure my distance from the tree to be about 24 feet and the angle of elevation to be 45 degrees, which is conveniently the ideal angle for maximum accuracy. In order to find the height of the tree, we simply need to solve the equation tangent 45 equals x over 24 by calculating tangent 45 times 24, and we'll get a height of 24 feet for x. Simply add the height of the person, taking the measurement, 6 feet in this case, and we get an approximate height of 30 feet. Now that math has given us the height of the tree, we can figure out how bad it would be if we fell. Now, according to science, you have a 50% chance of death from a 50-foot fall and a 90% chance of death from an 85-foot fall. Also, if you want to calculate the exact amount of energy that you will experience from falling from a certain height, you can use this formula, mass in kilograms times 9.8 times the height in meters, to get the amount of energy in joules. Using this formula, we can calculate that I will experience approximately 6,000 joules if I were to fall from this tree. So to culminate this lesson, I'm going to break down a somewhat beginner-friendly climb that includes most of the aforementioned climbing techniques. This is also the tree that we calculated the height for, so we know that we would have a less than 50% chance of death if we fell. So, take that how you will. Okay, so starting out on this climb, we're going to be tensioning our feet on this main trunk and pulling ourselves upwards to get to the first branch. Once we've reached the first branch, we're going to push ourselves to the second main trunk on this tree. Once we finish climbing the secondary trunk, we're going to grab the branch, plant our feet on the tree, and then climb up so that we can get our legs on top of that branch. From here on out, it's a pretty simple climb. It's all branches up to the top, and we're going to slowly make our way up, making sure to keep the necessary points of contact. Whenever we reach the top of the tree, the trunk is going to get thinner, and so are the branches that are attached to it. Now, it's up to you to decide where you think the highest point you can climb to is, but try and be slow and conservative and test the branches.